Hi, Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today, I'm talking to my good friend Dave Lawton from the Praxis podcast about the loss of my dear Michelle and how God's been at work through that whole experience.
Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast, and this week we really have a special treat, talking with Steve Addison. Steve, many of you will know, recently said goodbye to his wife after a struggle with cancer, and I went to the funeral. I had the incredible privilege of visiting Michelle a few days before she went, and it was just such an amazing, positive process to watch Steve and Michelle walk through the final parts of Michelle's life, but also they're glorifying Jesus with the gospel. And the whole time, I just thought it would be really great to hear from Steve of how he's going, but also just the idea of this gospel is true and real in the hardest of times and in the hardest of places. And when we're facing that one reality of life and death, what does the gospel mean? And so as we talk to Steve, I hope that you really get encouraged with faith, but also the relevance of what we're doing as we go out and make disciples, seeing people transfer from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light, to be able to follow Jesus into eternity, that this counts. This is really true. This is really real. So, Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Dave.
Steve, first and foremost, how are you doing right now after Michelle passed over a month ago? The listener will be wondering, how's he going?
Yeah, well, I think it's been a long journey. You know, I can't imagine what it'd be like to suddenly lose someone because, you know, we started this journey about 4 years ago. And along the way, there have been sort of obstacles we've had to, or gates we've had to go through of new realizations of the march of this evil cancer. And so there's been a lot of tears, a lot of grief, stretching back probably 3.5 years. And that doesn't take away the sense of loss and the pain of that. But it does prepare you, you know. And the other thing is, we just had an incredible funeral. You know, you were there and other Praxis friends were there. Really, Michelle's life and the glory of God shone through in the midst of the tears and the loss and the sadness. It was a magic day when we said, you know, goodbye to Michelle in that sense. So how I'm dealing, I'm not in the, I have at times over the last few years been in deep, you know, sorrow and emotion and all of that. Both Michelle and I had those experiences together. But right now, there's a deep sense of satisfaction in the goodness of God. In, you know, one of the things we did when it was becoming obvious the Lord wasn't going to heal Michelle. And we just looked at each other and we said, we made it. We did it. You know, we finished well. 42 years of marriage, 43 years sort of together. And, you know, look at what God's done in us and through us. The kids we've got, the grandkids, the disciples who've come to know Christ and gone on with him. And, you know, so it's just a mixture. And then practically, Michelle is the finance admin guru, you know. So I just write books and talk about movements. So wonderful. It's actually a blessing that, you know, since she died over a month ago now, there's just a lot of stuff to do, you know. in terms of just legal stuff and financial stuff, getting things in, and it's nice to be active without being too busy. Because now she prepared a list. So I'm ticking off the list. I've been to a couple of banks this morning, sorting things out. So for me, I don't want to be at home alone now, because kids have gone back to London and that sort of stuff, or back up in Sydney, and I don't want to be just sitting around grieving. You want to have some helpful activity, just enough, and then the grief, the sadness comes when it comes, but you're not just focusing on yourself. In another sense, you can't go back to normal life. So I'm just trying to, have time, but still get a few things done. Yeah. So that's a rambling. How am I doing?
That's great. And I mean, there cannot be a bigger game changer in one's life than have someone like your partner, your wife, your husband die. But Steve, in processing all this, and from talking about movements, and many people will know you as the guy who catalyzed them into movement, and reading your books. And I've met people around the world that says, Steve Addison, you changed my life, and how is what you've just gone through relevant to the worker who will listen to this and go, wow, I read his book, and how does this land in you as you look at God's big picture?
Well, my mind immediately goes back to the last book I've done on Acts and the movement of God, and this deep realization of the triumph of God, His Word and His Spirit advancing, never taking a step back. And yet the messengers, the catalysts, are beaten. They're in shipwrecks. They're in prison. They don't have enough money. And yet somehow God triumphs in the midst of hardship and suffering. And then you think, well, isn't that what Jesus showed us? So this strange paradox that this is a work of God and He will fulfill it. And He's chosen us and called us into this work. And yet we're going to be buffeted at times. Paul saw miracles, he had visions, but he also got beat up and dragged out and left to die outside some town. He also, almost drowned in a shipwreck. And then the guy's crawling up onto the beach, and they need some firewood to warm themselves. And it's just like Indiana Jones. This snake latches onto him. I'm thinking, Lord, give him a break, will you? And yet somehow in the midst of this turmoil, which is our lives, in the midst of our weakness and shortcomings and limitations, God is doing what He does. He's rescuing lost people, and He's forming disciples into communities, and the gospel keeps breaking into new barriers. So what does He want from us? He wants us to trust Him when it doesn't make sense. So what better opportunity than going that journey with cancer over 3.5, maybe 4 years, together, still believing, and trusting Him for the breakthroughs, for the healing, because God heals. But where are we when He doesn't? He's heard us and He's answered, and the answer is no. Well, He's there too, because His Son wasn't rescued. He was through the resurrection, but He faced death. He faced rejection, all of those things that you'd think, the enemy tried to tell him, well, look, God's not even, the Father's not even going to let your foot strike the ground. he's promised he'll send angels to, you jump off the tower, as though super faith could somehow protect you from the hardship of serving God in the real world.
That's right.
So Jesus saw miracles, and he was also crucified. And God is at work in both. And so, it was a dreadful experience and a wonderful experience to go this 4 years together with Michelle. The Lord is faithful, Dave. I don't know if you've worked that out, but regardless of appearances, even unanswered prayer, he is good. Yeah. Do you want me to keep preaching, or you got another question? And this, because of what we went through together in this, it's become part of who we are. You wonder, how does God change me? Is it just it is the exercise of your will. But there's a deep, deep change that comes at a time like this, where you're waiting on God and the answers aren't coming. And you open your eyes and you look around, and there's family, there's your children, there's loved ones who are getting a glimpse of the glory of God through Michelle's suffering and her faithfulness to the Lord to the very end. I mean, the power of God was not at work to heal her, but was at work to reveal himself. Not just the day of the funeral, but everything leading up to and after. It was just awesome. So, yeah, that's what's coming out of my heart anyway.
That's awesome. I can remember you talking about gathering, reading the scriptures, praying with many people around with Michelle, and that kind of reality of the presence of God coupled with the hope of God in the midst of this. This is not the end. This is just part of the story. So amazing stuff. How is, for some people, the gospel is a formula, but it's much bigger and much more. If I could ask this question, not about the formula of the gospel, but how has the gospel been relevant both to you and Michelle in this season? How's it been alive to you and brought life and comfort to your heart?
Look, we've been able to share with so many friends, relatives, and neighbours. I'm just thinking of our neighbours just next door, and often people will say, because they want to say something, and they're well-meaning, but they'll say, it's amazing how positive Michelle is. We need to stay positive. And I thought to myself, well, at some point, human positivity isn't going to raise her from the dead. Now, I didn't say it like that to them. I just said, yeah, she is amazing. But the secret to her positivity, she's got such a strong faith in Jesus, and he's risen from the dead, and she has a hope in that. And all of a sudden people start sharing, oh yeah, I've got a Greek Orthodox background, and you don't hear people talking like that. And all of a sudden the gospel's getting out. It's like when you're going through this, the great thing is, who's going to be upset with you for talking about Jesus, So, how's Michelle today? Well, she's really doing it tough, but, her faith is strong. And we have a hope because of who what Jesus has done. And so that was happening with so many people. Even now, I've been walking the dog. I've now got to do the early morning shift that she did. I do the afternoon and early morning shift. That's what she's left me with, the dog.
Jasper, the dog.
Yeah, Jasper, the dog. 2 days ago, I met 3 people who came up to me, and they recognized Jasper from the early morning, and they asked me about Michelle. Some knew she'd passed. One her husband came to the funeral. These are just people who met her on the beach. And she shared with them, and I get another chance to share with them how God's been at work in us through this hard time. And so I've never, it's God is using whatever circumstance we're in, whether He heals or whether we find Him in hardship. It resonates with people all around the night. We had people who'd only ever met her on the beach who turned up to the funeral at the local church here. So, we don't despair. Paul says, we're hard pressed. And he says, I feel like the sentence of death has been placed upon me. It's not a negative confession. It's just the hard reality of serving God in a broken world. But he says this comes, I think it's 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians, I'm not sure, one of the Corinthians somewhere. He says this has come so that we learn not to rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. One way or another, He raises the dead in this life and the life to come. And the most important thing is actually not do we suffer or are we healed? Does James get beheaded and then somehow Peter gets busted out of prison? The main thing is that people know the Lord Jesus. Right. So whatever hand we're dealt, this is our opportunity to bring glory to Him.
Fantastic, Steve. You've just written a tribute to Michelle, and I think you're going to be publishing that on your blog site. And let's focus on that a little bit and celebrate Michelle's life and some of that good things that we celebrate with looking at this precious life that God gave, especially to you, but also to many, many people. And she poured herself out. Could you just talk a little bit about that and talk about, how we can celebrate Michelle?
Well, one way, and this is such joy, about a decade ago, she pioneered, she famously said to me, Steve, you've written a great book there on movements, but when are you going to do something? Well, she went out and did something. She pioneered a ministry to internationals in Box Hill, English Conversation Club, and then integrated Discovery Bible reading, which virtually all of them were up for. And then followed up those who wanted to know more. Well, we've got lifelong friends out of that, Chinese, Singaporean, Persian, Iranians. There's an Iranian couple there, dear friends. And many of them have turned to the Lord. And so there you have, 10 years later or maybe 8 years later, there's the people that Michelle's led to Christ and discipled. There's Dave Everard, who she trained and raised up to take over this ministry. And it's still going on today, a decade later. He's still taking people through Discover Bible reading. And just to realize, the legacy that we have, it did multiply, but you wouldn't call it a multiplying movement. But to look at, there's, Linda and Frank, they're a Chinese couple that have been here a decade. And they've come to know the Lord. Or there's Spring watching online in Canada. She was a Taiwanese and she's been baptized by Michelle and discipled, and she's going on strong with a husband and a family. So I think to see the legacy of, even some family who shared in the service who haven't yet turned to the Lord, but they just so admired her love for God and for them. So you realize that a funeral like that is a whole lifetime in the making. So each of us, the great news is the statistics are in, and 100% of us, if the Lord doesn't return in our lifetime, 100% of us are going to die. And today's the day to prepare. Well, how's that going to go? And it's not to feel the burden of, that I've got to make disciples, so I've got a legacy. It's just that's the fruit of our lives that we can celebrate. People can celebrate one day.
That's amazing, Steve. So as you look forward and as you're processing what is God doing, what are you looking forward to? What's the future hold for you? Are you just going to retire now and are we seeing the end of Steve Addison, or is this what's ahead for you, mate?
Well, if I do, I might need a golfing partner, Dave, or someone to take me out back camping. But this is what I feel. Not like I said, to be active, not too busy. I have 4 kids and 3.5 grandchildren. So between now and Christmas, they'll be sort of putting the house in order and the finances in order and spending time with family. But I also felt I'm not ready to dive back into ministry that I'm primarily responsible for. So I'm heading out January 1 for Greece, which is we're building a hub there that's serving, the region, the Middle East and North Africa, Central Asia, and into Europe and even Sub-Saharan Africa. So I'll be based there, but doing trips to those different parts of the region, but not so much, Steve, the writer and speaker, is turning up. It's more, how can I serve? There's some regional guys that we'll just do trips together, or there's also a work amongst refugees occurring in Greece that's seeing a lot of good fruit. So I'll do that for a couple of months, simply to get out and be active without being too busy and allow God to work on me, just to come to terms with the loss of Michelle. And then I think asking him towards the end of that couple of months, Lord, what is next? Because there is another, an era, Lord willing, there's another stage that he has for me. And I'm blissfully ignorant of what that is right now. And I don't want to know. I just feel like get lost for a few months, and put your house in order, love the kids and the grandkids, and then go get lost. But do something. Don't just, sit. Well, you can't sun yourself in Greece in January, February because it's winter. So, that's my plan. Do I have another book in me? I don't know. What am I going to do with the podcast? I don't know. But unlike you, Dave, I'm free of a lot of responsibilities at the moment. And I just want to see what's the Lord up to. And I want to be close to the people who are on the front line. Learn from them.
Yeah. There is no doubt in my mind that God has special season in front. And as we just allow that to emerge and allow that to form, God will just take you and use you. God has much to do, and we're just really looking forward to walking with that, and for us to be able to serve you, Steve, and to see God's best come through you. Wonderful stuff. Yeah. Steve, as we come to the end of the podcast and just this reflection and this time, I'm just blessed because of the focus on glorifying Jesus in everything, and the focus on Jesus being in the good times, but also the hardest of times. And that was so evident. And I went up to you and said, "That's one of the best funerals I've ever been to, Stephen." You just said, one of the best. I said, well, I did watch the Queen's funeral, and that was pretty good. So, but it was because it was just. Jesus was so honored and glorified. And for the listener, you might even want to go and have a look at it. I think it's on YouTube, and we'll also be flashing the links to the celebration of Michelle's life on this. If you want to just jump over to the Listener and have a read. Steve, how would you encourage the listener, and how would you finish us as we look at Jesus being glorified in all things?
Well, I think I'd say be prepared for the worst, the greatest challenges you can imagine, and expect to find God in them. Expect to lean into your weakness in order to discover the glory and the power and the presence of God. That's what I'd say. You know, Michelle died in this room where I'm sitting now. People say, does that freak you out? Does it? No. You know, this is a holy place where not only did we cry together, but we also experienced the glory and the goodness of God as a couple. Surrounded by our kids. We cared for Michelle right up to the end with the support of palliative care from a Catholic hospital. They were amazing. And so expect the turmoil. You know, there are workers right now in Lebanon that are they don't know what their future is, but they're in the midst of turmoil right there, making disciples. So expect hardship. I told a new disciple the other day, I said, brother, it's going to be hard, and it's going to be good, because God is good. That's what I've learned, that you can find him in any circumstance, answered prayer, unanswered prayer, death, life, new life. But what the unchanging thing is the character of God revealed to us in the Lord Jesus. So make him your goal, not a movement your goal. A movement is the fruit of people who place him first and do his will. So it's nice to have come, you know, to have overcome, you know, my own weaknesses and limitations and sins as a husband, you know, and to have loved one another to the very end. It's a beautiful gift of God, and the overflow of that is the gospel's going out.
Thanks to the folks at Praxis for making that episode available. I'm Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast.